Doubt for Dummies. Doubt everything, especially if it sounds ridiculous. Part 1. Foundations of Skepticism. Chapter 1.
What is skepticism?
The Dawn of Doubt. How skepticism made the world and nearly burned it down. When the ancient Greeks weren't busy inventing democracy, philosophy, and the toga party, they were doing something much more radical, questioning everything. Take Socrates, for example. He wasn't just the guy asking annoying questions at dinner parties. He was the original skeptic, armed with nothing but his sharp wit and a talent for making people doubt their own existence. Socrates didn't write anything down, possibly because he knew historians would eventually twist his words into inspirational Instagram quotes. But his legacy endures. The idea that wisdom begins with admitting how little we know. Skepticism, at its heart, is about curiosity wrapped in a cloak of doubt. It's the intellectual equivalent of tapping on the walls of a house before buying it to see if they're hollow. But while modern skeptics apply this philosophy to everything from politics to pseudoscience, skepticism didn't always have such a broad remit. In fact, it started as a way of navigating the existential crisis that comes from staring at the stars and wondering why they're there and why you're here. Fun stuff, right? The Greeks did it first. Skepticism as a philosophical school was born in ancient Greece with Pyrrha of Elis, a man so committed to doubting reality that he famously refused to trust his own senses. He had friends to guide him around town, presumably to keep him from walking into walls. Pyrrha's followers, the Pyrrhonists, argued that you couldn't know anything for sure, not even whether you were awake or dreaming. If this sounds like a recipe for anxiety, you're not wrong. Pyrrha's philosophy is like the intellectual ancestor of that one friend who always texts you at 2 a.m. to ask if we're all living in a simulation. Then came the Stoics and the Epicureans, who didn't necessarily agree with the skeptics but shared their love of asking big, uncomfortable questions. The Stoics believed that living in harmony with nature and reason was the key to happiness, though their idea of happiness involved a lot less Netflix and a lot more enduring pain with a stiff upper lip. Meanwhile, the Epicureans pursued pleasure, but insisted on doing it responsibly, which probably made them the least fun people to invite to a party. The skeptical Renaissance. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and skepticism got a much-needed makeover during the Enlightenment, the intellectual age when Europe collectively decided to stop burning witches and start dissecting frogs. Thinkers like René Descartes brought skepticism into the realm of science and reason. Descartes famously doubted everything except his own existence, coining the phrase cogito ergo sum, Latin for "I think, therefore I am," or, as it's often misinterpreted, "I overthink, therefore I'm late to the party." The Enlightenment wasn't just about skepticism for skepticism's sake. It was about applying doubt constructively. Scientists like Galileo and Newton embraced the skeptical method to uncover truths about the universe. This was also the era of empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes from observation and evidence. In other words, skeptics learned to stop shouting, "Prove it," into the void and started looking for answers. Skepticism in the modern age. Today, skepticism is both more relevant and more misunderstood than ever. On the one hand, we live in an era of unprecedented access to information. On the other hand, we also live in an era where people think a Facebook meme is a reliable source. Skepticism, then, is our best defense against misinformation, but only when it's applied thoughtfully. The problem is that skepticism is often confused with cynicism. While a skeptic asks, "What's the evidence?" a cynic skips the question and jumps straight to, "It's all lies." Cynicism is the funhouse mirror version of skepticism, distorted, unproductive, and often a little smug. True skepticism isn't about tearing things down for the sake of it. It's about building a better understanding of the world by questioning assumptions. For instance, take the anti-vaccine movement. On the surface, it might look like skepticism. It's certainly questioning established ideas, but it's actually the opposite. Real skepticism requires examining all the evidence, not cherry-picking studies that confirm your bias while ignoring the overwhelming consensus of experts. In other words, being a skeptic means doing your homework, not just shouting "Big Pharma" in all caps on Twitter. A healthy dose of doubt. If skepticism has one guiding principle, it's this: Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This idea, popularized by Carl Sagan, is the perfect antidote to pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. Think Bigfoot is real? Show me a body. Believe in ancient aliens? Produce an artifact that wasn't glued together by a guy named Gary in his garage. Convinced the Earth is flat? Please explain why airline pilots aren't constantly flying off the edge. But skepticism isn't just for debunking crackpot theories. It's also a tool for personal growth. When you question your own beliefs and assumptions, you open the door to learning and change. It's like spring cleaning for your brain. You get rid of the cobwebs of outdated ideas and make room for fresh ones. Of course, this requires a certain humility, the willingness to admit when you're wrong, which is harder than it sounds, especially on the internet. The joy of not knowing. At its best, skepticism isn't just a way of thinking. It's a way of being in the world. It's about embracing uncertainty and finding joy in the search for answers, even when those answers are elusive. As the great physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." So the next time someone tells you they've discovered the secret to eternal youth or the meaning of life, channel your inner skeptic. Ask questions. Demand evidence. And if their answer involves crystals, essential oils, or a membership fee, feel free to laugh and then run. Because in a world full of noise, skepticism isn't just a philosophy. It's a survival skill. Footnote: for the record, no, we're not living in a simulation. But if we were, I hope the programmers give us a patch for 2020. Chapter 2. The Ancient Roots of Doubt. How philosophy became the world's most polite argument. In an age when fire and the wheel were still cutting-edge technology, humanity stumbled upon a tool far more transformative: doubt. Unlike fire, doubt doesn't burn villages, it burns assumptions. It's less wheel and more, let's discuss whether the wheel is the optimal shape for transport. And while doubt didn't get anyone to the top of Mount Olympus, it did get us something far more valuable. Critical inquiry, the mental gear shift that keeps the world from rolling into absurdity. At the forefront of this revolution in thinking were three philosophers who dared to ask, what if we're wrong? Socrates, Pyrrha, and Cicero. Socrates, the original troll, but make it intellectual. Socrates wasn't just a philosopher. He was a walking existential crisis. His approach to life was simple: question everything, especially things people took for granted. If you told him you were brave, he'd ask you to define bravery. If you said the gods were watching, he'd ask how you knew. If you claimed the earth was flat, well, he'd probably smirk before leading you into a spiral of self-doubt so profound that you'd leave wondering if you were even standing on earth at all. Socrates' method, the now famous Socratic dialogue, wasn't designed to win arguments but to dismantle them. It worked like this. Step 1. Find someone who claimed to know something. Step 2. Keep asking questions until their certainty crumbled into a pile of ums and maybes. In today's terms, Socrates was the intellectual equivalent of that friend who ruins movie night by pointing out plot holes. But instead of plot holes, he went after the holes in your worldview. One of Socrates' favorite targets was the concept of wisdom. Famously, he declared, "I know that I know nothing," which was either a deeply profound statement or the world's first humble brag. By admitting his ignorance, Socrates set himself apart from the so-called wise men of Athens, who were confident in their unexamined beliefs. This wasn't just philosophical banter. It was a radical act in a society that preferred certainty over introspection. And while Socrates ultimately paid the price for his unrelenting doubt, spoiler, it involves hemlock, his legacy endures as the foundation of critical thinking. Pyrrho, the skeptic's skeptic. If Socrates planted the seeds of doubt, Pyrrho of Elis watered them until they grew into a jungle of indecision. Pyrrho took skepticism to its logical extreme, questioning not just beliefs but the very possibility of knowledge itself. Where Socrates asked, "What can we know?" Pyrrho asked, "Can we even know what knowing is?" A question so abstract it could make a philosophy major cry. Pyrrho's skepticism wasn't just theoretical, it was a lifestyle. According to legend, he refused to trust his own senses, which made crossing the street an adventure. Fortunately, his friends often accompanied him, presumably to pull him out of the way of oncoming carts. Pyrrho's philosophy, known as Pyrrhonism, argued that since certainty is unattainable, the best course of action is to suspend judgment on everything. Want to debate the meaning of life? Pyrrho would respond, "Maybe it has meaning, maybe it doesn't," and then go enjoy a nice glass of wine, assuming he didn't doubt the existence of the wine first. While Pyrrho's radical skepticism might sound impractical, and it often was, it had a surprising upside: tranquility. By refusing to commit to any particular belief, Pyrrho claimed to have found peace in uncertainty. It's a philosophy tailor-made for anyone who's ever spent 20 minutes debating what to watch on Netflix. Why choose when you can simply not care? Cicero, the Renaissance man of Rome, Marcus Tullius. Cicero, on the other hand, was the skeptic you'd want at a dinner party. Unlike Pyrrho, who might have spent the evening doubting the existence of the wine, Cicero would sip it while delivering a witty critique of Roman politics. A statesman, orator, and philosopher, Cicero brought skepticism out of the realm of abstract philosophy and into the messy, practical world of governance and ethics. Cicero wasn't a full-blown skeptic in the Pyrrhonist sense, but he was deeply influenced by the skeptical traditions of ancient Greece. He adopted a middle-ground approach known as academic skepticism, which argued that while absolute certainty is impossible, some beliefs are more probable than others. Think of it as skepticism with a side of pragmatism. Doubt everything, but don't let it stop you from functioning as a rational human being. One of Cicero's favorite topics was the nature of justice, which he saw as both universal and endlessly debatable. His works, such as De Legibus, on the laws, and De Officiis, on duties, tackled questions that still resonate today. What makes a law just? What are our moral obligations to others? And most importantly, can we trust politicians to do the right thing? Spoiler, Cicero's answer was a resounding, probably not. Cicero's blend of skepticism and practicality made him a critical voice in a Rome that often prioritized power over principle. His willingness to challenge authority, and his knack for doing it with flair, earned him both admirers and enemies. In the end, like Socrates, Cicero paid the ultimate price for his commitment to truth and reason. But his writings remain a testament to the power of doubt as a tool for justice and progress. The legacy of ancient doubt. What unites Socrates, Pyrrho, and Cicero is their shared belief that doubt isn't the enemy of knowledge, but its starting point. Socrates showed us how to question assumptions. Pyrrho reminded us to embrace uncertainty, and Cicero demonstrated how skepticism can be both principled and practical. Together, they laid the groundwork for critical inquiry, a tradition that has shaped everything from the scientific method to your uncle's long-winded debates at Thanksgiving. In a world increasingly filled with noise, from conspiracy theories to clickbait headlines, the lessons of these ancient skeptics are more relevant than ever. Socrates teaches us to ask better questions, Pyrrho encourages us to stay humble in the face of uncertainty, and Cicero reminds us that skepticism isn't about tearing things down but building a better foundation for truth. So the next time someone claims to have all the answers, channel your inner Socrates and ask, "How do you know?" Or better yet, pull a Pyrrho and simply shrug. Because if there's one thing the ancient skeptics understood, it's this: the search for truth begins with the courage to doubt. Footnote: Pyrrho's philosophy might also explain why he never wrote anything down. After all, how could he be certain the ink would stick? Chapter 3. The Enlightenment. Doubt as Progress. How questioning everything rewired the world. Imagine living in a world where everything, from the stars in the sky to the laws that governed your life, was explained with a shrug and a vague reference to divine will. For centuries, this was the reality. Why does the sun rise in the east? Divine will. Why are kings in charge? Divine will. Why does bread cost so much? Probably divine will, but also maybe the king's taxes. Then came the Enlightenment, a period when humanity collectively looked at this answer sheet, crumpled it up, and said, "Let's try something else." At its core, the Enlightenment wasn't just a historical era, it was a movement fueled by one radical idea: that doubt could be a force for progress. By questioning traditional authorities, religion, monarchy, and even nature itself, Enlightenment thinkers rewired the world. Skepticism became the battering ram that cracked open the fortress of dogma, letting in the light of reason, science, and, yes, a good deal of revolutionary chaos. Challenging dogma. Because we said so was no longer enough. For centuries, the Church had been the ultimate authority on knowledge, with a monopoly on explanations for life, the universe, and everything. Disagreeing with this often ended poorly. Think heresy trials, public executions, and an unsettling number of bonfires fueled by books. But during the Enlightenment, thinkers like Voltaire, Spinoza, and Diderot began to question whether an institution that punished dissent with fire might not have humanity's best intellectual interests at heart. Take Voltaire, for instance. This sharp-tongued Frenchman had a talent for poking holes in religious and political dogma. His weapon of choice? Wit. Those who can make you believe absurdities, he once wrote, can make you commit atrocities. Voltaire didn't argue against faith itself. He argued against blind faith. He believed that reason and evidence should guide human affairs, not the whims of clergy or monarchs. Naturally, this got him exiled a few times, but it also made him one of the Enlightenment's most celebrated skeptics. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, Spinoza was busy redefining God, not as an old man in the sky, but as the natural world itself. This didn't go over well with religious authorities, who promptly banned his books. Spinoza's radical skepticism didn't stop there. He questioned free will, miracles, and the idea that humans were somehow special in the grand scheme of things. In short, Spinoza took the Enlightenment's motto of "question everything" and applied it so thoroughly that even his fellow skeptics sometimes winced. Science gets revolutionary. The Enlightenment wasn't just about questioning religious dogma. It was also about rethinking how we understand the natural world. Enter the scientific method, a system of inquiry that prioritized observation, experimentation, and, most importantly, evidence. In other words, science was skepticism with a lab coat. One of the movement's poster children was Isaac Newton, who famously stood on the shoulders of giants to figure out why apples fall from trees. But what made Newton remarkable wasn't just his discoveries, it was his approach. Newton didn't accept old explanations about how the universe worked. Spoiler, most of them involved angels. Instead, he tested his ideas rigorously and invited others to do the same. The result? A whole new understanding of gravity, motion, and the universe itself. But science in the Enlightenment wasn't all polished equations and eureka moments. It also had its skeptics, like David Hume, who questioned the very concept of causality. Hume pointed out that just because two events occur together, the rooster crows, then the sun rises, doesn't mean one causes the other. This idea sent shockwaves through the philosophical and scientific communities, forcing thinkers to be more precise in their reasoning. In a way, Hume was the philosophical equivalent of that person in your group project who keeps asking, "But how do we really know this will work?" Governance meets skepticism. Why are kings in charge again? The Enlightenment wasn't content to stop at science. It also upended the way people thought about power. For centuries, monarchs ruled by divine right, which was essentially the political equivalent of "because I said so." But Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau dared to ask, what if power came from the people instead? Locke, often called the father of liberalism, argued that governments should exist to protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property. If they failed to do so, citizens had not just the right, but the obligation to rebel. This was revolutionary stuff in the 17th century, and it inspired movements from the American Revolution to the French Revolution. Though Locke probably didn't envision guillotines in his political theory, Rousseau took Locke's ideas even further, proposing that true sovereignty lies with the collective will of the people. His book, The Social Contract, opens with the famous line, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." This wasn't just a metaphor, it was a call to action. Rousseau's skepticism of traditional power structures laid the groundwork for modern democracy and gave monarchs everywhere a collective case of heartburn. Skepticism as a catalyst for change. What made the Enlightenment so transformative wasn't just that it questioned authority, it was that it offered alternatives. Instead of blindly accepting dogma, Enlightenment thinkers championed reason, evidence, and debate. Instead of clinging to tradition, they embraced progress, even when it was messy and uncomfortable. Of course, skepticism also had its limits. The French Revolution, fueled by Enlightenment ideals, eventually descended into chaos, proving that even good ideas can go horribly wrong when guillotines get involved. And not all Enlightenment thinkers practiced what they preached. For example, Rousseau's ideas about freedom didn't extend to women. But for all its flaws, the Enlightenment remains a testament to the power of doubt as a force for progress. The legacy of Enlightenment, skepticism, today, we take many Enlightenment ideas for granted. Democracy, human rights, the scientific method. But they all began as radical questions. What if kings aren't divinely chosen? What if the universe doesn't revolve around Earth? What if knowledge isn't something handed down from on high, but something we discover for ourselves? The Enlightenment reminds us that skepticism isn't just about tearing down old ideas, it's about building better ones. And in a world where misinformation spreads faster than facts, the spirit of Enlightenment skepticism, curious, bold, and unrelenting, might just be the thing that saves us. Footnote: if Isaac Newton had lived today, he probably would have invented a social media platform just to post memes about gravity. Let's all be grateful he stuck to physics.